do it over there?
Whatever you'd prefer to do. I normally tell folks take off the headphones for a quick second. Why the hell won't this grab? Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay. It's not giving me volume. I know what's going on there. I gotta go to the other desk 1 second.
All right. It's a tiny bit loud, but
Yeah, tolerable.
it's tolerable. Now, do you break here and there, or
If you want to take a break at any point, you're welcome. There's a restroom around the corner here, but that's up to you, man. I'll edit it out in the end.
yeah? If you see me go like this, or if I go like this, whatever. Actually, I'll do this if I say, I give you the thumb up.
Yeah.
Not the finger up, you know.
That thing is rugged, man.
I think I told you the Haze is Haze just because of the way the last name was spelled.
Sounds good to me, brother. I'll label however you want. The one and
Okay.
only Edward Van Haze. What's
Yeah.
going on, brother?
Yeah.
Man, I gotta tell you, there's not many folks that bring me the joy of moving from Nashville to Cincinnati. So welcome home, brother.
Glad to be here.
Yeah.
Glad to be back. I'm from Cincinnati originally. I moved to Nashville in, I think, 99, right around there.
Yeah.
And I moved down there. I was dating a girl, and she was a singer in a band. And I met her at, I was actually auditioning the band. They weren't auditioning me. They wanted me to play. So I came over and I met her. After about 9 months, she said, "Hey, do you want to move to Nashville?" And then a moment of, okay. Just kind of said, yeah.
Sure, why not kind of a deal.
So we moved down there. We had to go find a place to live. And so we had an afternoon to drive down there, but we only had like an hour to pick out a place to live. And she had an aunt who was a real estate agent down there. And so she had, 3 or 4 places for us to look at. And the second one we looked at was the one that we picked. It was real close to downtown. It was in Green Hills, great neighborhood. And that was the pivotal moment in my life right there. That was the lucky break. I had no idea at the time that that was the case.
Yeah.
But we had just moved right next door to a bunch of famous songwriters. These guys had written a lot of #1 hits. And for the first 6 months we lived there, we didn't know who lived there, because these guys never came out of the cave. And then one day, on a warm day, they had a built-in swimming pool. They were out there cleaning the pool, getting it ready and stuff. And she said, "Take a 6-pack over there and get to know these guys so we can use their pool." And so I did, and they took me in the house. There were gold records everywhere. And I was like, holy cow, this is it, okay. And then through them, I wound up meeting a girl named Lana. She sang backups for an artist named Pam Tillis. Now, Pam Tillis, a lot of people might not know her now because she was real popular in the 90s. She was like the Taylor Swift of the 90s.
Yeah.
She had a gazillion #1 hits. Anyway, so she sang backups for her, and I had started writing songs with Lana. One day she called me, and she said Pam flipped out and fired half the band, which Pam's famous for doing. And she said, "I think if you do the audition, you'll get the gig." And anyway,
This was with your neighbors, or with Pam?
This is with Pam Tillis.
Okay.
Yeah, Pam was the artist, and Lana sang backups for her. And I got to know her, through the guys next door, because they wrote songs with her. She was trying to be an artist too, and she was using Pam as a vehicle, which we all kind of were doing that same thing. We all wanted that gig.
Yeah.
Now, it's funny now, when I moved to Nashville, we said, we'll give it a year. Well, a year came and went, and even though I met those guys, 6 months into being there, Nothing happened. We were playing every place we could downtown for free most of the time.
Yeah. And this is you with your girlfriend's band that you kind of moved down there with?
Well, actually with just her, because when I met her at that band audition, we ditched the band.
Nice.
we started playing around Covington and basically northern Kentucky. She was a liquor rep, so we played at all of her accounts, and they like overpaid us, and she made it up to them on the other end.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so it was a great story. So, but
yeah.
you know,
Any clubs that you really remember memorable gigs at in Covington?
Strasse House, Cosmos, a lot of places like that.
Yeah, Strasse House is still one of those like 7 days a week music spots that 10 to 2 slot. You would never imagine that there's going to be a ton of people in there. There's always 10, 15, 30 people in there. You know, it's confusing.
Oh, people drink. It's 5 o'clock somewhere or 3 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. They're making it happen.
I actually know the guy that wrote 5 o'clock somewhere. He was the guy that played keyboards on Daryl Worley's records. Who I wound up with. He played keys on all those records before I came along.
Yeah.
And he's the guy that wrote that, and he wrote it in like 5 minutes.
And did you hear that song before it got pitched?
No, I never got to. I heard it on the radio, and I didn't even know it was him that did it.
Yeah.
I wound up finding that out later, but I thought that was pretty cool, you know.
It's got to be an interesting thing of when you're involved in that scene, you do see these songs kind of start to trade hands. The songwriter has this great idea.
Yeah.
It pops up at a round. One artist cuts it, doesn't do nothing. Another artist cuts it, doesn't do nothing. But then there's some that just, you can feel it's a hit from the moment that it enters into your ears.
Yeah.
Are there any songs that really stand out as something that you heard before it became a radio hit?
The very first number one that Daryl Worley had, and that's who when I quit Pam Tillis's band, I went to Daryl Worley. The very first number one he had was a song called I Miss My Friend. Now, we eked it out in the last week before Billboard was going to pull it, and it was only number one for a week, but we got number one out of it. Daryl had been riding around with a cassette tape of that, the 3 people, I can't remember their names, the 3 people that wrote that song, but it had sat in his console, you know, for 2 years. And Daryl's got narcolepsy. He can fall asleep behind the wheel. So one day he decided, no, I'll put that tape in and I'll listen to it. I heard that version of it too. And I honestly wouldn't have guessed that song would have been a number one hit.
Yeah.
And it wound up being a number one. So that song really stuck out to me, and it kind of taught me a lesson. That, you know, it's how things are produced, and when the right artist gets a hold of a song, it makes all the difference. Now, Daryl, besides being a country artist himself, before he was ever signed that way, he wrote songs for other people, like George Jones and, you know, a lot of big country artists. And so you have to pitch the song to the right person, and sometimes it has to go through three or four people before it finds a home.
And as someone that is a multi-instrumentalist, like you said, like 32 instruments, you feel comfortable stepping up and getting things done on, right?
Yeah, pretty much. I'm mostly, people know me the most for electric guitar.
Yeah.
I was an 80s guy. Nobody misses the 80s more than I do. But I would say, as a kid, I started out playing when I was 2.5 years old, and I started on piano.
Yeah.
I had 2 older sisters and an older brother, and they were already playing by the time I was born. And my mom, now I don't remember a lot of this, as the story goes. It's been handed down from my parents to my siblings and whatever. They would be playing piano, and my mom would dance around with me, hold me, and stuff. And I'd put my finger out, like, I want to do it too. Mm-hmm. And one day my dad got the bright idea to grab the captain's chair from the dining room table that had the arms on it. They put me in there and then wedged me in with pillows so I couldn't get out. And I would just sit there and go, bah, bah, bah. It drove my mother crazy. It was like the worst game of Simon, if you know what that game is, And it just drove her nuts. And she would say, make him quit. And Dad would say, no, just let him go. What they didn't know is that I was figuring it out.
Yeah.
And it was because of my perfect pitch. I was figuring out that when you push on this one, it sounds like this. And I started to get to know that when I pushed on a note, I knew what it was going to sound like ahead of time. And then one day, I just started playing, and my mom ran out and got my dad. She said, Lloyd, come in here. There's something wrong with him. And I started playing. But that's the instrument that I played. I didn't stop playing classical and jazz piano. That's what I was raised on. I was not allowed to listen to the radio when I was a little kid. My dad didn't want that in my ears. He wanted me to grow up and be a classical pianist.
Yeah.
So I did that for a long time, but he owned a music store, and I learned how to play everything in it. And I didn't start playing guitar till I was 16 years old.
So when would you say piano clicked for just a kid sitting there kind of dabbling, making these associations between notes and tones and having this kind of catalog? When did it become 2 hands on the instrument, accompaniment, things like that?
At about 4 years old.
Wow.
At 4, I could reach the pedals. And my left hand, for whatever reason, I was filling in holes where a lot of guys, when they first start playing, it's common. I teach for a living now, and I see this with a lot of kids. They just, you'll see them push on one note, especially if they're writing something. They'll just push on one note with their left hand as a bass note, and then the right hand does all the work. For whatever reason, I felt it necessary. I was hearing holes in chords because I was listening to these jazz records when I was just, 3 and 4 years old. Peter Nero was my hero. And I would learn his arrangements. And by the time I was 4 years old, I could play a lot of his stuff. And he had a great left hand. And so when I would hear a song, I would emulate that song. But a lot of times I was going, wait a minute, there should be more notes in it. And my left hand would kind of jump in there and fill in the cracks. And I basically taught my left hand to be like my right hand.
Yeah.
So.
And did you find as a young person, like you're learning these things based on ear? You already have this kind of God-given gift of really, really tight pitch association.
Oh, it's a curse too, by the way.
Well, I'd imagine. One thing I wanted to ask, is it 440 or 442 when you got perfect pitch?
It's 440 because that's what I got used to.
Gotcha.
But there have been times where my calibration, this all kind of started when I started playing guitar and Van Halen was tuned down, and they didn't tune to standard pitch. It was below E, but sometimes it wasn't really E flat. It was somewhere in there somewhere. I think they did that a little bit because it helped Dave be able to hit an A above middle C because that was like his best note that he could hit as far as how high he could sing. And so my calibration got a little screwed up then. Let's see. But through the years, though, there was a lot of bands that did that back then. When Van Halen did it, everybody jumped in and started doing the same thing. Some of those guys were tuning down to D, like the entire thing.
I find that bizarre, too. It's like, I know that a lot of, like, the Nashville songwriters just a half step down. A lot of country songwriters just a half step down. It's like, maybe I'll have a guitar set up to do that, but most of the time I want to play in standard.
Yeah.
If the guitar didn't change your calibration of that, do you feel like initially you would have been at 442? Or was it always going to be where you landed with that first piano?
I think, my dad was really adamant about keeping our pianos tuned. He owned a music store, and we had a guy that went around and, people would call and say, hey, do you know somebody who tunes pianos? And so this guy would come tune our pianos all the time. And once I started playing, that piano got tuned once every 3 or 4 months.
Wow.
So I got used to standard pitch, and to me that was the holy grail. That was it.
What a luxury too.
Oh, it was great. We had 2 pianos in the house. There was about 6 of them at our music store. So there were pianos all over the place, but they were all perfectly in tune. Yeah. So that's what I got used to.
I heard a really wacky thing the other day saying that everything has its acoustic resonance, and if you go into the pyramids, it's tuned to an F sharp, and there's something about an F sharp that has to do with our natural calibration with the planet. And you start to think about all the ways that you interact with music in that way. Especially if you put a pair of headphones on, you play the right chord. The way it resonates with your body is such a spiritual thing. Mm-hmm. Did you find yourself as a kid sitting next to the piano having certain resonance and keys that you would kind of lean towards? Or did you just find a way to do it all 12 keys all the time?
There's 2 keys that stick out to me. That's funny you should say F sharp. I'm going to go to Crazy Train in just a second for that. But the key of the key of F sharp just sounds meaner. And there was a lot of songs written back then in that era that everybody wanted to play songs in F sharp. It just sounded meaner. If you played it in G, it sounded kind of bubblegummy or whatever.
Yeah.
But the key of D flat was the other go-to key, which most kids, especially when they're first learning how to play the piano, they stay away from the black keys. And I wanted to play the black keys because they had kind of this eerie kind of thing going on. And I listened to a lot of classical music too. And classical music by nature has always, had a lot of flat keys in it and stuff. So I learned how to play in every key, and I could transpose something on the fly, if somebody was, singing a song or whatever, I would just jump in whatever key they were already singing in.
Yeah.
And it was not really that big a deal. It didn't take me long to learn all the different keys. And so.
I feel like as a kid that learned on guitar, the association between notes was always the relationship amongst frets. And that's almost a disservice to you when you become an adult and you try to talk music with somebody out. Mm-hmm. How many sharps, how many flats in the key? It's like there's one place where this makes all the sense in the world, and it's on piano. And as a kid, when you look at your chord voicings amongst 10 notes, seeing the interconnectedness you can have within 2 octaves versus having it amongst 4 octaves, it seems like such an advantage to have this idea of how much you can span the keyboard versus when you pick up a guitar. Did you ever feel limited by the way that chord clusters and whatnot would have to fit?
Absolutely. And again, my left hand, I tend to play a lot of stuff very low with my left hand, whereas a lot of guys will play at an octave higher. I want to get as much as I can. I basically play what I hear in my head, and if I hear it with like an octave like C or D flat or whatever, I'll play the octave and I'll make it count.
Yeah,
I want it to be a bass player. You know.
What a great way to put that, to make it count. And did you find that octaves is what most kids lean towards, or is it just a reinforcement
Usually
thing?
that finger, the one that I got in an accident with a potato peeler.
Yeah, the one that you peeled,
Yeah.
Now, when you were learning as a kid, did you have options other, like when you're learning these more jazz-based chord voicings, was a lot of fifths and fourths, or what are kind of the color tones that you're putting on a left hand?
Again, like a lot of octaves, a lot of fifths, no thirds. When you're playing that low, thirds sound terrible. They do, because of the frequencies that you're playing down there. A lot of people don't know the frequency means note. But a third sounds terrible low. So mostly it was fifths, and it might be a sixth, never a seventh, because that didn't sound good down there either.
Yeah.
So, but most of the time it was, and it's like a lot of bass players do that when they're playing, just like a blues, there's the root and then there's a fifth. You see them they play ping pong with those 2 notes a lot, and that's why they sound good together, and you can, really differentiate between them.
And I guess that realization as a kid, like one thing I want to ask you about hearing these songs before they're produced and then seeing them become number ones and kind of knowing the building blocks that go into making a regular song great or a great song better. Being a kid that's played all these instruments, that's been the solo accompaniment and then also been a small part of the band, did you find that you had a major advantage when it came to sparsing out your parts of just playing what was necessary in the music and not playing the extra notes that most guitar players got to come play 6 strings under this? It's like, maybe you're better off playing 3 if you're going to play Mando, thinning that out.
That's an interesting question for this reason. When I first started, and I've played on a lot of records, and when I first started doing it, I knew what I wanted to play, but until I heard what everybody else was going to play, I had to figure out what piece of the puzzle I was going to be, and you have to be able to do this.
Yeah.
And that's usually why, as they're doing a sound check or something, they'll let the band, you read the chart, and you go through and you get a feel for what other people are playing, and everybody kind of finds themselves, and then they'll go in and they'll punch stuff. And the producer's the guy that makes that call. People don't realize how important he is, because he's the guy that might say, okay, I need an organ to do this part here instead of a mandolin or whatever. Piecing that together in the name of tone is really important too. So, I kind of had to find my way through that, but as you get to play on more and more records, you wind up playing with the same people a lot, and you kind of know their personality, and you kind of know what you're going to do ahead of time for a good bit.
So it became more rules of personnel rather than rules of instrument, of who goes where, kind of.
Yeah, pretty much.
Gotcha. And did you find in your own writing and production, things like that, did you find that different instruments were a very particular part of your personality? Like if I'm writing ballads, I'm on the piano, but if I'm writing pop, I'm going to be on a guitar? Or did the song kind of tell you where you were going?
Most of the song, now I've written a lot of love songs. All my metal fans would probably hit me over the head. They didn't. For the longest time, I wouldn't tell anybody I listened to Q102, but I did back then because it was right next to WEBN on the dial.
Yeah.
And I'd hear a song on EBN and go, I hate that, and I'd flip it over to Q102, which is funny. This is a good story here. Let's say a Boston song was on EBN, and I didn't like it, which I'd like Boston. But I'd turn it back, I'd put it over to Q102, and it would be higher. And I'd go, what's going on here? They were cheating. Back then, they were reel-to-reel tapes, and they had a pitch control, and they figured out that if you just bumped it up enough, not to make your voice sound like Alvin and the Chipmunks, but in order, if they bumped it up a little bit, at the end of the day, they saved another 3 or 4 minutes, which meant, more commercial time, because you only get paid for commercials You know, you have to pay to play the song. People don't realize that.
Yeah. And so who was Q102 was doing that?
Yep, they were doing it, and the FCC got them, I think, or whatever. Somebody busted on them, and that was the end of that, and they had to start playing stuff like that.
That's so fascinating. When you first started hearing bands that would intentionally detune by, a quarter step or things like that, were your ears on fire as someone that had that internal pitch, or did you recognize it and like the choice?
It was confusing at first because I didn't think that I was smart necessarily. It's like when my dad figured out I had perfect pitch. To me, it was no big deal. It's not any different than a kid looking in a crayon box and going, I may not know how to spell the word green, but I can reach in the crayon box and tell you I know which one that is.
Yeah.
And it's kind of crazy, but people made a big deal about it, and they always have. They don't realize what a curse it is too, because it can be. I never thought, and I don't mean this in an arrogant way, when I say this, a lot of people take it the wrong way. I didn't think that I was smart. I thought they were stupid. I mean, and this is just a little kid, that's the mentality of a little kid to think that I'm like, how come they can't hear that, Dad? And he just said, they just don't hear it like you hear it.
Yeah, well, I heard a quote the other day. It's like, when you listen to folks speaking of their specified field, all these things that they assume you would know seem like it seems like layman's terms. If you're talking to a civil engineer about something, he's going to just glide over all this shit that you would kind of need. It's like, I barely ever picked up a hammer in my life. You're going to have to tell me how to use that. Versus you as a kid, it's like, no, I'm moving on to the more interesting part of the question because I'm assuming that you have this back catalog of info.
Right.
Yeah. When you first started to hear tapping on a guitar, did you feel like there was an association between that and arpeggiating on a piano?
Yeah, as it turns out, Van Halen, he wrote everything just about that Van Halen ever recorded. He wrote it on a piano. Him and Alex Van Halen, his brother, the drummer, they were both classically trained. Now, Eddie had trouble learning how to read, which I had trouble learning how to read too, because I would fumble through something at 1 mile an hour, and then by the time I got to the end of it, I knew it.
Yeah.
And then I could play it. You throw that out, get him a piece of music he's never heard before. But now I forget what you just asked me.
Tapping and arpeggiating on the guitar.
I learned eruption on the piano before I learned the chords, and then I arpeggiated it in the triplets.
Yeah.
I learned it on the piano first, not knowing anything back then. There was no YouTube or anything, any reason that I would know that Ed wrote that on a piano. But I learned it and learned the chords on it, and then I figured out the very first way that I played it, because I didn't understand. There were no videos back then. We didn't have any help. I had to keep putting the needle back. And the first way I did it, I took one of those hair things that girls used to put in a ponytail, and I think I was probably the first guy to ever do this. I put it over the neck to keep the strings quiet. And I was playing Eruption on the 4th and the 3rd string, and I was hammering it, 4th string and then 3rd. I was playing Eruption with one hand.
That's absurd. And also, you graze over this thing. If you would have coined a hair tie on top of the neck, all these metal guys would be paying you dollar bills right now, brother.
Yeah,
it's like,
exactly.
That's hilarious. And so when was what else did you learn like that? Like, what else did you kind of, okay, I figured out how he's made this one arpeggiation happen just in the left hand. Did you start to go through the catalog that way?
Yeah, every time a Van Halen record came out, that became his signature. Between that and the whammy bar, people don't know that one of his greatest tricks was born out of just keeping the guitar in tune. There's one trick that he does where he bends, and anybody who plays electric guitar knows, if you don't, especially like on a Strat that doesn't have a locking nut.
Yeah.
If you bend the 3rd string up, as soon as you bring it back, it's flat.
Yeah.
It didn't make it back over the nut, and then you have to take the bar and go. You have to do that. And Ed's most popular lick was born from that. I've never heard that from anybody. I just know that I had to do it. That's how I figured the trick out. It's because when I had a Strat, I would bend that string and it would go out of tune, and I'd go like this, and I went, wait a minute, that's what he's doing.
So like the dive bomb effect is what you're talking about? And explain, so when you bend up your G, you have excess string that is pulled from the actual tuning peg over the nut, and now it's not going to release properly until you give it slack and tension again?
Right. You have to, because it has to release and go back over the nut. And the thing with the locking nut, it's like a set of vice grips. The string stays the same length because it's locked at both ends. It stays the same length, so you can bury it till the strings are just basically falling off the neck.
Yeah.
You know, and you can bring it back up, and the string's still the same length, provided that the strings have been stretched. Now, Eddie used to boil his strings. Who thinks of stuff like that?
Yeah.
He did it to boil the stretch out of them. And they would stay in tune, because back then when they first had the Floyd Rose come out, they only had the locking nut. So they had to tune the guitar the best they could, lock it, and then that was it. There was no way to tune it. And then I guess Ed got a violin and went, they got fine tuners on that. And so they figured out how to make that happen.
Whoa, you just blew my mind. I never realized that's a violin thing. And I just bought a violin. Now I was like, this is annoying as hell.
Good luck.
Yeah, exactly. It's a hot mess of an instrument, man. Oh. So growing up in a family that has kind of traditional instruments in the house, your dad's one of these lap steel pros. Like, was that his primary?
He played steel guitar, he played fiddle, but my dad was probably best known. Now, my dad played with Bob Wills and the Texas Playboys, and they were the Texas swing, like country music. They were like Led Zeppelin of country music back then. Mm. And Dad played fiddle and steel for him. But my dad, in his later years, became known. He was one of the top 10 jazz guitarists in the world.
Wow.
And my dad he was unbelievable. He could play his way out of a chord maze. It was just amazing what he could do naturally. And as a kid, I used to just sit there and scratch my head because I barely understood what he was doing.
Yeah. And is he kind of the reason that you started to eventually go to a guitar? Or was it pop music that led you to want to also play guitar?
No, this is a great story, too. I stayed away from the guitar. So out of all the instruments I played, the guitar was the last one. And two major things happened to me. Probably in about the same week. There was a kid at school. I was going to the School for Creative and Performing Arts. There was a kid there, and he would bring a Gibson Flying V to school with him, and he'd sit in the corner, and play on the floor or whatever, and girls would get around him. And I thought, and he wasn't much to look at, no offense, sorry, Ted. He wasn't much to look at. But girls were crazy about him, and I thought, this doesn't make any sense. And then I started going, wait a minute, the guitar, okay. So when I went home that day, I had a Fender Mustang, which had a whammy bar on it, and I pulled that out of the closet, and I just started playing it. And the first song I learned how to play was Train Kept A-Rollin' from Aerosmith. And I could play just enough of it, so I brought my guitar to school. And before you know it, I had a bunch of girls that normally wouldn't have given me the time of day. I had big ears and short hair and, military haircut and all that, because my dad was in the military. Of course, we had to have short hair. And all of a sudden, I had a crowd around me, and I thought, so this is how you do it. So that was one thing that happened. So here I am. I'm at home. Probably it could have been that same day or the day after. My brother played guitar really good, too. He had long hair. He's 7 years older than me. He was in a band, and I looked up to him. I wanted to be like him, but I was afraid that I would never be as good because he was killer. He played a lot of Led Zeppelin, Aerosmith, stuff like that. And so I was afraid of the guitar. So one day I got in my dad's music store, it was an Earth amp. That was the name. I don't even think they make that anymore, but it was this gigantic, amplifier. I had it fired up, and I started playing Train Kept A-Rollin', and all of a sudden, somebody taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, it's my brother. He goes, "What are you doing?" I said, "I want to be a guitar player, Jerry. I want to be just like you." And he goes, "Oh, no. He goes, "Stick to keyboards." He goes, "The world needs more keyboard players." He goes, "And besides, even if you start now, you'll never catch me." And I think I said my first cuss word then. And it was on. I practiced 6 to 8 hours every day. Many, many mornings I woke up and I had fallen asleep with my guitar.
Man.
And I went after it like crazy. In a year, what I accomplished, it would have taken anybody else 5 years. And it's what I've learned from that experience was that it's not how many years you've played. It's not even how many months. It's how many hours. Good quality hours.
Yeah.
And I put a lot of hours in that first year, and it's why I got as far as I did really quick.
Well, I think your good quality hours is a really hard thing for people to find out. How do you learn? How do you start to recall that information? What do you need to get things out under your hands? Because it may be a little bit different for everybody, but for the most part, there's certain rules of practice that you need to get under thumb. Like, what would you tell someone when it came to, I've been playing for a year and I'm not making the progress I want? How do you put in your good quality hours?
Typically, with any student I've had any trouble with at all or who has had that problem, it's focus. Because they'll play something, and if they goof up, they'll go to another song that they can play, and they don't focus on the problem. One thing that I was very disciplined at, and this is from playing a lot of piano when I was a kid. I would do something until I got it. Matter of fact, like about 2 months ago, I was teaching a student, and I showed him something that he wanted to learn, and it might have been a little bit out of his wheelhouse. And then I showed it to him, and he started to play it. He said, "Man, I'm going to have to play this 1,000 times before I get it." And I said, "Yeah, go ahead, play it 1,000 times and get it over with, and then we'll both know how to do it."
Yeah.
So you got to do something until you get it. There is a point though that if you take on something that's a little bit out of your league, you have to kind of admit defeat and go, okay, maybe I'll do something else for now, and I'll come back and get that later. Mm-hmm. But I tried everything. I mean, I ruined a lot of records, I'm telling you, because back then that's all we had. Besides the 8-track tape player, which you had to wait for that to come back around. A half hour later, there it is. And I'd have to go mow another lawn and go get another Van Halen record, which is not. It was just funny because I still have the first Van Halen record. It was the demo. My brother worked at Camelot Music. He got behind me. Once he figured out I was going to be a guitar player, he was all about it.
Yeah.
And he brought home Van Halen 1, and it says for demo purposes only. It's got a little cutout in it, not for sale. And they would do that. They would play that for a couple weeks before they'd get the first shipment of Van Halen records in, or any album they would do that with. And he brought that home, and he said, "This is going to be your favorite band from now on." And he was right. Hence the shirt. I had to wear this today, by the way.
That's awesome. Well, it's also on the back of your car, man. Like you're deep. Not that we need anyone identifying your vehicle that way, but what a great thing though to have this a little bit of exclusivity around hearing music for the first time. Like one thing that I feel like Spotify and streaming has kind of robbed us of is the cultural zeitgeist of music coming out. Mm. And if you're a kid and you walk down to buy your next record or your 8-track and you hear something for the first time and they say, "Oh, it's not for sale till next week," you stay there and you listen through the rest of it because you want to catch that. And if your friend's there with you, you're like, "Dude, do you remember when we heard track 7 of that new band?" There's this moment in time that now when everything is so immediately accessible, you kind of lose some of the sex appeal of these things.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the first like forbidden fruit of like a song that you heard but couldn't get for a little while? Like I think it was Diary of a Madman. Oh, man.
And it had, the hair on my arms is standing up just thinking about it. It's in A flat, and the chords in the beginning of it were just scary. And I didn't have the record. I heard that on EBN, I think. And why they played that song, I have no idea. It was never a radio hit, but EBM would play weird stuff. But I heard that on there, and it just made me just go, "My gosh, what's going on here?"
Yeah.
That was one of those moments. I had a lot of those, but that one stands out in my head as being probably the biggest one.
When we think about guitar playing culture, like, sometimes there's standouts, but I think all standouts need a little bit of competition to make things really interesting. And hearing more about Randy Rhoads through the most recent documentary of him and Eddie living on opposite sides of town and playing shows around each other, it's just like, that's what you need when you want music to make leaps and bounds beyond what it's been. So for not one guy to be out there doing a little tapping, for these two classical kids to come out and just be straight trailblazers for a new genre of rock and roll is bizarre.
He gave Eddie a run for his money. It's really funny. I mean, the 80s were the greatest time to be alive if you wanted to be a guitar player. Mm-hmm. And, because about every year or two, some new gunslinger would come out. Randy Rhoads came out, and everybody wanted to be like him. And I followed him, too. I learned every song off of he was only on 2 records before he died, bless his heart. But I learned every song. I didn't just learn the notes. A lot of guys, when they learn a lick, they'll say it's a D flat. Okay, so they might find that note on the 11th fret on the 4th string, but you can find it on the 6th fret on the 3rd string.
Yeah.
When I listen to something, I don't just listen to what notes being played. I try to listen to the tone also. I did this very early on too because I wanted to play it just like they did in the position that they played it in, and that was how I learned how to play in positions. And it was by these, emulating my favorite guitar players. There was Randy Rhoads and there was Steve Vai, another guy. He was kind of a cross between. He was just crazy. He was like Gumby.
Yeah, man.
You know?
Oh, I never realized that Steve also played with Zappa, and it's like the peculiarness of that music only becomes even cooler when you look at the late careers of Terry Bozzio and Steve Vai. You're like, man, how do you reel these two guys in their 20s in when they have that kind of ability?
Yeah, that's some crazy stuff. There was, like I said, there was you know, several guys came out. There's like Paul Gilbert. You know, he kind of set the bar about, you know, here's how fast you have to play if you want to be great. And it was all about, for a long time, it was about shredding and seeing how fast you could play. It wasn't about the notes. Yngwie Malmsteen is another guy that is, you know, because he can play 6,000 miles an hour. He's a freak. For sure. Yeah. But he does, to me, he gets old after a while. You know, you hear enough of it, you're okay, whatever. But I did appreciate what he did for sure. But there was a point in my career where I quit, and here we go back to Q102 again, and me listening to the Bee Gees and all that stuff. I found that listening to top 40 music, the melodies in those were just, they were so much more rich than anything that was in metal or hard rock or anything like that, in the harmonies that the vocals had. And I started not trying to shred all the time and play, you know, tapping all the time and trying to play as fast as I could. I started playing like I would sing if I could sing good. Now, I'm a backup singer, and I got a really high voice. You wouldn't know that from hearing. I talk like a softball coach.
Yeah, exactly.
They used to call me Mariah Larry.
I love that line. You said that to me once before, and I thought about that for days. I talk like a softball coach, man.
Yeah, but for some reason I maintain my falsetto. It's always been really high. It's why I got the Pam Tillis gig. It had nothing to do. I went to that audition to play piano for her, and there was no mention of singing. And all of a sudden, through my in-ears, I hear, "Hayes, can you take that high part on there?" And I'm like, ah. I didn't know what I was going to do, and I knew the words. I'd been listening to these songs for 5 days straight. And so I took the high part, and she goes, "Man, you got a high voice," you know. So then she made me take the high part on another one, and then another one, and then she told me, she gave me the greatest compliment I think I've ever gotten for a guy that can't sing. She said, "You're the best third harmony we've ever had in this band."
Wow.
And I thought, man, coming from her, that's really cool.
And finding that third harmony, it takes someone that's listened to chord clusters and try to say, I can't put a finger on the note, but it's the feeling of that note being there, and learning how to decipher that feeling is such a distinct thing.
Yeah, what I've learned, and I teach voice too, and what I try to teach people, and I use recordings. I use Cubase for my vocal students, and we record them singing along with the karaoke version of whatever song they're doing, and I teach them how to sing the harmony. And they get to know that as the melody. So there's no vocals in there. The only part that they listen to is the harmony part. And when you get it in your head that that's the part that stands out to me, it's not so hard to sing to the real melody once you put the real track on, which is a really good trick, you know. And you get people to start paying attention to all these other notes that are going on.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a lot of environments that I'm singing harmonies on, but it's, as an acoustic guitar player, you always get those opportunities where you're going to be the second harmony. But once we started to have a bigger band and you start to try to find that third part, you realize how almost mystical it is when a guy's good at that. And then you see the horn players that can sing come up, and they just nail it because they're used to living in the middle there and trying to figure out, like, my relationship to the melody is going to change every time that this guy moves, but I'm still going to fill out this chord. I know what it should be total. Yeah,
there's kind of a natural gift in there too,
for sure,
for that, because there are some people that just, they can't. I mean, I'm not going to mention any names because I'll get killed for it. You'll hear about it in the news tomorrow. But there have been artists that I've played with that are #1 selling artists that couldn't sing harmony to save their behind.
Yeah.
And they got other people to sing them on the record because they couldn't, you know, even though the producer would be in the booth going, "No, it's not," you know, they'd sing it to them and they couldn't pull it off, so they'd have somebody else sing the harmony.
Yeah.
Some people just can't hear past the melody. They can't. It's just ingrained in their head. And that's just something that you sometimes can't teach somebody. But somebody who's got a decent ear that can, you know, what my biggest respect is for somebody who can, like Geddy Lee, for instance. He's on the bottom, but he's also on the top.
Yeah.
You can't get any farther apart than that.
No, man. And the syncopation, playing bass and singing, especially in that music, it's like, I don't think he gets respect in the great world of rock nerddom as being like just one of the greatest storytellers and frontmen of what that is. But I think just purely as a vocalist, someone that sounds like themselves, that can really paint you a picture while also just holding it down, their instrument, like monstrous, just monstrous.
Yeah, that was really difficult for me, because when Pam started having me sing all these harmonies, she figured out I could play acoustic guitar too. And now comes the nightmare. Some of her songs you had to use a capo. Well, guess who had never put a capo on a guitar? Me.
Never? The guy with the hair tie, isn't it?
I never put one on, and that's like kryptonite is what it is. We were playing something, and I was just fretting everything with my first finger, on a bar chord, and she told me, she goes, why don't you use a capo on that? It'll sound better. And I went, uh-oh. I put that on, and the way that my ear works, if I look at a note, it better sound like what I hear ahead of time. If it's different, that's like taking all the letters on a typewriter and rearranging them and saying, okay, now type fast, because it's not the same.
Interesting.
If you hit it, you're open, all 6 strings, and it's the 5th fret. I'm going, wait a minute, that's not an E, that's not a B, that's not a G.
Yeah.
It drove me crazy. So I had to learn how to do that. It was like starting from scratch again.
So take that back to this world of kind of not drop tunings, but a little bit more dissonant tunings of being tuned to like an E flat. When you're playing with the guitar down a half step, are you calling it an E, pretending like this is the category that it's in, or like?
Yep, it's a trick. I have to tell myself that I'm playing an E when I know damn well that that's not the case.
Well, at least in Nashville, too, you're using the number system, so it doesn't make too much of a difference necessarily to call it that. It's like you don't have to lie to yourself and say this is an F when it's really an E,
Yeah, that was a difficult thing for me to get used to as well. Like when I first started playing playing sessions, I didn't know the number system, because to me, as a kid, everything I learned was a letter. So somebody would say, hey, what note was that? One guy would say, that's the 5. It goes to a 4 and then a 1. I'm going, uh-oh. And then I had to think about what scale we were in, and it took me a second. I couldn't do it on the fly. So I used to, when they were doing sound check, I would cheat, and I would sit there and I would write the letter name next to the number as they were playing the song, and I would chart it as we were going. And then, once we got to roll, boom, I had it down. And then nobody ever knew the difference. And then I finally got it together, and I could,
Yeah. It's such a bizarre shorthand, but I found as someone that uses a capo a lot and using a looper a lot, that you start to intuitively feel out, like, it doesn't matter if I really know what the key is necessarily. I've gotten used to the way these chords move, so if I put a capo on and I find that one, now we're just going to kind of bounce around this. And I find that the looper is a great instructor for what you kind of earned as a kid on a piano, of saying, okay, I know this chord voicing doesn't need to have all this weight because the thirds in that, I have this low G. Why would I put another, like interim note in there? So learning how to thin out your voicings and whatnot.
Yeah. What was I going to say? I think what you were referring to before, the way I took that was, even if you're playing a song, you don't necessarily know what key it's in or whatever, you put on a capo, your fingers, basically, they start to know where to go. And it's because you know your intervals. That's what's commonly referred to, as you probably know, as relative pitch. Some people have, I know a guy who's got relative pitch that blows my perfect pitch away. He's actually the guy that wrote It's 5 O'Clock Somewhere. His name's Moose. That's what they call him. And his relative, I thought he had perfect pitch. I was certain. And he said, nope, I don't. I said, I'm not buying it. No way. And it turned out, I got to know him over the years, and he does not have a perfect pitch. But given one note, if you say, okay, here's a D, you can go bang, 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 and he can call him out all day long, and he's never wrong.
That's incredible. You ever watch Rick Beato on YouTube?
I watch him all the time.
Sensational. His interview with Yngwie is probably the best Yngwie interview that will ever exist.
Just saw it last week, yeah.
Man, one thing that I thought was hilarious was hearing him talk about scalp frets in that. And I have a buddy that just started playing again. He played as a kid, but he's getting back into it. He's taking lessons with our buddy Sean McGarry, having a great time doing that. And he called me. He's like, I'm looking at this guitar that has scallop frets. I was like, don't do it. You're not at a point that's going to make any sense to you as to why. But hearing Yngwie say, it's because I don't want to have to go down to the fretboard to get the note, just blew my mind out both my ears. Like, did you ever have a guitar that was scalloped Floyd Rose, like the full 80s apparel?
I did. For about 6 months, I had one. What I learned right off the bat, I didn't realize how hard I was pushing down. Now, I didn't have jumbo frets until I actually got a scallop neck. I had the smallest ones you could get. I didn't realize how hard I was pushing down with my fingers. And as soon as I started playing a scallop neck, I was making everything sharp by pushing too hard, and the notes were going all over the place. And so I had to learn. I didn't play another guitar for probably at least 3 or 4 months. All I played was that, and it taught me how to play with a lot lighter touch, which wound up making me faster when I went back to just my regular Strat.
Yeah.
And something I learned about Yngwie, and I think they talk about this in that interview, and I've seen several interviews on him where he'll talk about how he picks. He's like, I don't sweep pick. He goes, sweep picking is down, up. He does sweep a little bit. He might rake 3 notes in a row. But what I've learned about him, and one of the reasons that he's so fast, and I learned this through using a scallop neck, when you push on a string on a fret, there is a ching, like a chime, that goes off. That creates the illusion that you actually picked the note. Because if you listen to him play and you watch his right hand, he's only picking 2 notes out of 5 or 6, and it's because he's getting the chime effect with the fretboard. That's why he's able to do all that stuff. He's just he could play with one hand all day and just go, and you would think that he's using his right hand.
Yeah, when that also seems like a tonal choice for a lot of guys, whether that's the gain output of your amp or it's going to be the little bit of compression that you use to kind of get that. When you were really playing in these more country acts, was it foreign for you to be on such a clean tone for a lot of that sound?
Yeah, to some degree.
Yeah.
Now there was another guitar player when I first got in Daryl Worley's band. I came in as a keyboard player. They had no idea of my metal background, which actually turned out to be a really good thing. They said, yeah, he plays a little bit of acoustic guitar. So they kind of knew that. But I never unleashed any of that other stuff. And it's a good thing I didn't, because he told me, he said, if I'd have known your rock and roll background, he goes, there ain't no way in hell I would ever hired you. Because he had a guy that's, his name's Jeff Jarrett. Great, we call him Swaw.
Slaw?
Swaw, like S-O-I-R. Like,
okay, I thought it was like coleslaw. I was like,
no. No. But he can do that chicken picking stuff where you're holding a pick and then you're using your fingernails to pick. He's the best at that. So right about the time country music kind of took a turn, there were groups like Montgomery Gentry that came out, and they didn't have the fiddle and steel friendly. And Trace Adkins is another one. They kind of started gravitating more towards what sounded like Southern rock. It was more of a guitar heavy sound. Mm-hmm. So Daryl got rid of the fiddle and steel, and he said, well, we're going to have to get us another guitar player. And I said, I play electric. And we had a rehearsal, and the first thing I did was play Eruption. And those guys looked at me like, what? They didn't know what to think.
Yeah.
And he said, why didn't you tell me you could do that? And as it turned out, it was a good thing I didn't.
Yeah. What was it like to hang up a guitar when you get to Nashville, because there's keyboard gigs to be had? Like, good thing your brother told you the world's always going to need more keyboard players, and it certainly does. Like, it
made all the difference in the world, because the first week I was in Nashville, I had like $450 before I was going to run out of money. Now, she went down there. She had a job. And I had about $450, so I would just drive downtown, and I would go from bar to bar, and I would try to meet as many people as I could. And everybody I bumped into, and I'm talking about hundreds of people, they were all guitar players chasing the same dream I was. And I said, there's no way I'm ever going to get in this business. And as it turned out, I got in through playing keys and being able to sing backup. So I kind of went in the back door, basically.
Well, what a great lesson, though, for folks that you need to have multi-instrumentalist skills that make you comparable as a utility man more than you need to be the specialist. That there's no great guitar player that's fronting an instrumental band in Nashville. It's like you can only be so good before there's a point of diminishing returns in this.
Yeah.
Do you find in your teaching life now that there's more kids wanting to learn to play keyboard because of the way the pop music has changed?
No, actually, 80s rock has made a comeback, and nobody's happier about that than I am. And I think it all goes back to, like, my kids grew up with me listening to Van Halen, AC/DC, Judas Priest, whatever, said, they listened to that stuff, and their kids wound up listening to that stuff. And then I think Guitar Hero and what is the other one, Rocksmith?
Rock Band.
Yeah, when they came out, they were all playing 80s rock. So these kids got used to hearing this. And, now these kids are, adults or they're teenagers or whatever. And they're coming in and they're asking me to learn how to play, some late 70s, but mostly 80s rock. I teach more guitar than I do anything else. Almost nobody wants to play the piano again. It's turned into this nerd instrument again.
Yeah. Were there any songs that came up in that you forgot you learned as a kid? That someone walks in and says, I want to learn this, and you listen to, you're like, hold on, it's like putting in an old floppy disk or something.
No, for whatever reason, I have just a crazy memory. I remember a lot of useless information as well. I can remember like all the telephone numbers from the kids in my neighborhood. I still got them up here. But if I've heard a song a few times, I never forget it. And when I recall it in my head, I hear it in the key that it's in.
Yeah.
And somebody will say, hey, do you know this song by Nirvana or whatever? If I've heard it, I can eke it out.
Yeah.
It might take a second, but
that's hilarious though to remember it strictly in the key that it's in too, because the amount of times that things from the pop culture world, if you're playing on Broadway especially, someone's gonna do it down a whole step, and you have to go through a mental conniption of like, but it's not the key it's in, and I know it in the key it's in.
Yeah.
That's hilarious, man. So when you first moved down there, what kind of keyboard were you dragging around?
I had a Yamaha P200.
Cool.
Which back then was the industry standard for a touring guy.
Yeah.
I went down there, and that's what I had. And when I got the Pantelis gig, I needed a synth that had, because the strings in the P200 were terrible. The piano sound was the only thing that was worth anything.
Yeah.
And so she gave me a credit card and said, go to Mars Music and get you a synthesizer. So I got a Yamaha S30. It had a great string patch in it, and so I would MIDI that through my P200.
Nice.
And I still have that stuff.
And when you would MIDI it through, so you're still playing on the P200, but you're just using it pretty much as a head?
Well, sometimes I would reach up and I would use, if I was just playing a single, like I might be playing a piano part down here, and I wouldn't have the MIDI turned on. I'd play a piano part with my left hand, and then my right hand I would reach up and do a single note or whatever, just a single string part up here. So there were two different instruments going on. But there were times when I would hit MIDI and I would play everything on the piano. So you're hearing a piano and the strings at the same time.
Interesting.
But I could play chord on the piano, have piano and strings on that, and still reach up and do a single string part and not have the piano sound in it.
Interesting.
Which a lot of her songs had that.
And did a lot of keyboards at that point in time have the capability to do dual patches that you could put, without having the synth on there, you could use one of the lesser preferred string sounds with a piano patch and have that dual layered?
Yeah, you had to be kind of an Einstein to figure that out. I mean, most guys do what I did. I would just find a cool sound. Like there was one on the S30 that said piano and strings. Now the piano sound kind of sucked. But it was convenient. I didn't want to go through the hassle of trying to figure out. So whatever.
Yeah.
But yeah, they had the technology back then, but they weren't as slick as they are now. You can do anything you want these days.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting now. It's like you should just buy the best controller you can, and your computer's going to do all the work. Because that world is infinite. That world's going to keep moving exponentially. But if you get something that feels nice under hands, you've solved most of the problem.
Yep.
What was the first synth that you stepped to after playing acoustic piano your whole life?
Oh, geez. I think it was a Kurzweil.
Okay. I've never heard of Kurzweil.
Yeah, it's with a K. Kurzweil, I had a gig, a house gig down at, it used to be the Waterfront until that broke away and floated away down the river. That was one of Jeff Ruby's restaurants. And we had the outdoor gig on Fridays and Saturdays down there, and I had to play guitar and keys, and I needed a keyboard, and I knew somebody, and they needed some money really bad, and it was only a couple $100, probably should have been $1,000,
yeah.
And I bought it.
And had you been playing synths before that, like growing up in a music store, or did your dad not really deal those?
He didn't really do, no. He was mostly, like the only thing electronic I think he sold was either a Fender Rhodes or a Wurlitzer.
Nice.
And those were the only ones. And the action on those was always kind of weird to me. It's like I was overplaying because I was used to playing, a Steinway Grand or, whatever, where you really had to work for it. And it was kind of weird going to keys that were easy to push on. And that's another reason I stayed away from synthesizers a lot too. Plus, I was eating up with the guitar. I didn't want anything to do with keyboards, especially when the keytar came out. You remember that thing where you put it around your neck? It was like, oh no, what have they done now?
Just because you want to be at the front doing the rock with everybody else's stage antics.
Yeah, but it just looked goofy. Nothing against anybody who likes that stuff, but
yeah. Well, I will say, like, I think the keytar is such an interesting thing to watch someone now. You know, like you had said, most keyboards are kind of leaning on their right hand, but to have your effects on the left hand, whether that's your pitch whammy or a little bit of oscillation, things like that, it was interesting to watch the way that changed how guys thought about it. You know, like mini Moogs and things like that had been around long enough, but nothing like watching a guy work a wheel is nowhere near as cool as watching a guy try to break a whammy off a keyboard. You know?
Yeah.
Have you ever seen the clavinets with the whammy bar?
I've seen it. I've never actually experienced one, but yeah, I've seen that. I think that's pretty bizarre.
It's the funniest thing I've ever seen, man. It's just like...
It's like a Weird Al kind of thing, you know?
It kind of is. There's one cat that I see a bunch of Facebook clips of him playing it, and he is monstrous on the thing. It's like, boy, I really hope that you have a solid road crew that, one, enjoys working for you, two, has a strong back, and three, has an awesome road case, because that does not seem like it should last.
It's not real friendly that way, for sure.
Yeah. Did you grow up playing any organ?
Yeah, you know, we had Hammond B3s around and stuff, and I kind of learned how to do that. And I think on the last record before I left the band, I got to play a couple songs on that. I played on that whole record right before I left the band, and I was either playing piano, B3, or guitar, or singing, or sometimes all of them.
Yeah. Is this with Dave or with Pam?
Or Daryl.
Daryl Worley. Daryl Worley.
Yeah, and I knew how to. I understood it well enough. There was a little kid named Lucky Peterson when I was a little kid. He was on the Johnny Carson show, and Dad said, "We're going to get you on that show." And I passed the audition for the show, and then my dad decided at the last minute not to do that to me because he started putting me on TV when I was a little kid. And that Lucky Peterson kid, he could play a Hammond B3 and just tear it up, you know.
Yeah.
So that kind of inspired me a little bit. But, yeah, he started putting me on TV when I was little, and he saw what it kind of did. And he was like, that kind of made him change his mind about putting me on The Tonight Show.
What was it, a negative experience that you and your dad had with the TV thing?
No, it had some, it rippled into some good things. I think I was really young, like, you know, 6, 7, something like that. I went on a show called The Paul Dixon Show, and which is funny because I used to watch that show as a kid every morning. And my dad and I were in a department store. It was like Kmart. It was called Zayre's back then in Hyde Park Plaza. And he was standing in front of us in line. And I said, "Dad, look, it's Paul Dixon." My dad goes, "Hey, Paul, how you doing?" You know, Paul turns around. He was a big guy, and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" And my dad introduced himself, and he said, "This is my son. He plays piano just like Beethoven." He goes, "Really? We got to get him on the show." And he gave him a card. 3 weeks later, I'm the special guest. I got to play 3 tunes on that show.
Do you remember what you played?
Yep, I played "The Shadow of Your Smile." I think I played "Close to You" and the theme from Exodus. And the band played along with me on a couple of them because they knew the tunes. And out of that, I wound up going on the Nick Clooney show. That's George Clooney's dad.
No way.
George was, the Clooneys are from Cincinnati. George was actually on the show that day. I think George was like 14 or 15. I remember him hanging out. He had long hair, and he was a cool guy. And out of those shows, somebody wound up seeing me from the University of Cincinnati. Somebody saw me on those shows, and it was clear that I was playing by ear. I wasn't reading any music, and they said, "We got to get this kid some help." And all of a sudden, one day, the local paper shows up at my dad's music store, and they want to take some photographs. And I'm like, "What's going on?" They wound up giving me a scholarship to the University of Cincinnati Conservatory of Music to study with, this lady's name was Ilona Vorm. Now, I say that like she rolls her R's.
What a beautiful role you got, brother.
She had to have been 105 years old. And she scared me to death. She sounded like Count Dracula, you know. She was really scary, and she would take a ruler and go, you know, for the tempo. And if I hit a wrong note, you know, she'd slap my hands. I cried at every lesson for a long time. I hated going there.
How long did you take lessons with her?
Too long. I don't know, at least a year. And then I went through several teachers because they didn't understand me, and they didn't understand my ear.
Yeah.
And I wound up with a lady named Dorothy Payne. She was the concert pianist for the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra for like 25 years. She had perfect pitch, but she could read her butt off too. She knew how to do both. And when I came to her, she understood me, And she was able to get me over the hump and teach me how to sight read music, because I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
Not very quickly. It was terrible. That was one of the worst experiences I ever went through.
And was that kind of the breaking point of, you're a kid that has this incredible ability to pick out the color and the feeling that's associated with these chords and make it happen, but starting to understand like the mathematical equation of, that's the seventh, this is a flat seven, this is your major six, like.
Yep.
And how old were you when that happened?
I think, let's see, I started going to the School for Creative and Performing Arts right when it first started. It was the second year of that school's existence. It was up in Mount Adams in 3 separate buildings. That was 5th grade for me. My sister and I both passed the audition. There was only 50 kids in the school. And guess what instrument they gave me to play? I wanted to play trumpet, and they said no. Congratulations, you're gonna be a violinist. I couldn't stand to hear myself play for months. And guess who my stand partner was, of all people? Sarah Jessica Parker. She was my first kiss I ever had, too.
No way.
She was my stand partner, and I used to take my violin bow and I'd bop her in the temple and stuff. And one day I asked her, I said, "Will you go with me?" And she's like, "Go where?" She didn't understand what I meant. Finally, when I got it across to her, she said, "Yeah, but you got to stop hitting me with your violin bow."
What grade are you in for this?
This is 5th grade. She was a year younger than me. She was the first girl I ever kissed, and she had braces, and it hurt. I remember that. And but of course, she had to take theory class. Back to your question, and they made us get legit, and I wanted nothing to do with it. I didn't understand why you had to do that. I would tell my dad, "Look, Dad, I can hear it, and play it back. Why do I have to learn?" He said, "You'll see when you get older." And it took me many years to get it under my belt, but I had to take music theory. I went to that school till, I don't know, 10th or 11th grade, and then I went to a Catholic school after that.
Where'd you go?
Purcell, Marion.
Nice.
It was actually Purcell back then, and then
it became
Purcell Marion, because they just combined the boys and the girls together.
Yeah. I went to the other Marion school, Moeller.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, man. It's so funny the way that Cincinnati, it's just like, even if you're going to go to the School for Performing Arts, at some point you got to go to a Catholic school. Even if you're not religious, you got to come on.
Yeah. Well, there was a lot less trouble in Catholic schools. There was discipline, and I made headline news. I won't go into the story, but I got beat up really bad. I had to walk a mile to the bus stop to catch a Metro bus from, it was on Sycamore Avenue, is where the School for Performing Arts wound up.
Yeah.
It's the old Woodward High School building. And they had to share that school with another school. They had the first 2 floors, we had the top 3 floors, and there was just all kinds of, we were the special kids, and they weren't. Anyway, long story short, one day after school, I got jumped, 8 guys, they beat me within an inch of my life. I made headline news.
Jesus.
And I just decided, I said, I don't want to go to this school anymore. My dad, kept making me go. And when I finally was old enough to earn some money, I was out shoveling snow. I was cutting grass. I was doing everything I could. And it was $100 a month to go to Purcell.
Yeah.
And I paid my way through Purcell High School. I wanted to go there. My brother went there. My dad said, "Well, you see what happened to him, and you're not going there unless you pay for it yourself." So I had to pay for it for myself, but I did.
Wow.
I taught piano lessons for $3 a crack back then. That's how cheap. The lessons are like $40 now.
At least, yeah, I think for a guy of your stature, it's like you got to be able to charge enough to make a living, and it's impressive what YouTube University can teach you. But when you're first learning anything, it's like, if you want to learn the efficiency and the touch and the feel, there's something about a person in front of you saying, like, "This is how I learned to love the instrument," that you just don't get through a screen.
Rephrase that.
When it comes to taking music lessons for the first time, of learning piano, learning guitar, however you're going to do it, do you think there's more value in being face-to-face with another person versus learning it from a computer?
Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing like having a one-on-one with somebody. What I've noticed, this is kind of funny too. I've had, it doesn't happen very often, but every now and then I'll get a left-handed guitar student. It's like looking in the mirror, because they're facing the same, because your headstocks are both going the same way.
Yeah.
And but I definitely having somebody there is. I do some online lessons and stuff too. They're not as effective, it depends on where the person's at. Like if it's a beginner, you know, and it's a keyboard lesson, and it's a kid, you know, those are almost impossible. But being the personal experience, like most of my students when they come in, we talk for the first 5 minutes that we're in there. There's not a kid that comes in my studio that doesn't have something they want to get off their chest.
Yeah.
And I let them get through that for a few minutes. You know, sometimes I give them some good worldly advice because I basically wrote the book of mistakes. And, you know, and then we get through that and then we can get on to the music, you know, and that's proven to be very effective. You know, and I become the town psychologist, you know, I guess, you know, over in Madera.
Well, one thing I wanted to touch on, like you talked about when you were learning a lot of these things from records, you could hear the tonality between a D flat on this string and a D flat on this string, and trying to learn how to play it exactly how they did it. Did that teach you how to be really efficient on the instrument, or did you find that out through your own economy of playing?
What I learned is that most guys would play things within a 4-finger reach. And come to find out, the reason that the guitar is tuned the way that it is so you can basically, you know, you got 4 fingers, you can play at, you know, like a 2-octave G scale, you can play 2 octaves, and within 4 frets, you got 4 fingers, you got 4 frets. It works out perfect. You don't have to go out of position. Now, you can scoot up a position, and then you have to spread out a little bit more, and you have to do that. But it was designed to make the fingering easy. And that's super important. But I noticed that when I would learn songs, sometimes the position I would play something in was just absolutely terrible, and I'm like, there's no way that the guy's playing it here. And I'd find another place to play it, and then I started noticing that most of the time it was within a 4-finger reach, and all these guys were playing the pentatonic scale, which is, you know, if you're doing the home plate version of it's you know, 4 fingers, 4 frets.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah, I kind of figured it out through trial and error, but it started making sense that way. And then, you know, of course guys like Yngwie came out and kind of ruined all that for me.
Yeah.
You know.
But at least you already had the ability to do wider spreads from a piano and get yourself a little bit more in like hand-based contortions, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I actually, when I started figuring out, you know, because the guitar's only got 6 strings on it, so you only get 6 notes. You got to pick the best 6 notes you can if you're going to try to be effective. Whereas you got 10 or more if you're using the pedal on a piano.
Yeah.
But through playing piano, I started looking at the guitar. I actually posted this on Facebook. It's a pretty cool little thing that I drew on there. The way that I looked at the guitar, if you take the guitar and you just lay it on your lap, I look at it like 6 keyboards that are staggered. Okay, just imagine like a 6-tier keyboard stand. You got one keyboard here. This is your first string. Here's your second string. Here's your third string. And they're all keyboards. And I drew it that way with the black keys and the white keys, and I put it up there, and somebody said, man, that's wow, I never thought of that like that. That's brilliant. And it made them start looking at and they were a keyboard player too, and they started looking at the instrument like that, because you can play the same thing. You know, your open first string is an E, where you can go to the 5th fret on the next one, the 9th on the next one, the 14th on the next one, and on and on. You know, on a 24 fret neck, there's 6 different ways to play your first string.
Yeah.
You know,
man, that kind of blows my mind in a really weird way. I'm gonna have to look at that. That's on your Facebook.
Yeah, it's if you scroll through the pictures, there's at some point there's I posted that on there. But it's how I started looking at, especially when I had to start imitating guys like Yngwie and climbing around the neck. I had to figure out a logical way to think of it, and I started looking at it like 6 keyboards.
Yeah,
I can jump up here. It's like you know, Donkey Kong or you know, Super Mario or whatever. You're just zigzagging your way around.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, it's so. Man, I can barely speak after thinking about that. I need to see that diagram. That's wild.
You got smoke shooting out of your ears.
Yeah, exactly. Tell me about your dad and his pedal steel tuning.
There's a company, I think they're still in business, I don't hear much about them, named Showbud. And my dad, he was a hot dog. There wasn't a whole lot of guys that played steel back then. The instrument hadn't been around. At first, the steel was like basically like a lap steel that they had 4 legs on it, you know, and it stood up, and then they added the pedals, and
how much can the pedals bend?
Oh geez,
Is it half steps, full steps?
No, you can do whole steps on it for sure.
Okay.
Most of the time, most country music is where you're going to hear a steel. Mm-hmm. You can bend up. It depends on how you have it set up. So you can bend up a whole step, you can bend up a half step, which is kind of weird. That takes a lot of control to do that. Or you can drop it down a whole step. I've heard that on records too. Some guys do their own goofy tunings on there, so you never really know what you're going to get. But the guys that do it traditionally, there was the standard tuning that they came out with because somebody had to figure out the first one.
Yeah.
And then Showbud came to my dad and said, "This is limited. These guys are saying that they can't play in other keys as easy. It was just tougher to do." And so Dad figured out another way to get around that. And so that's why you see a lot of pedal steel guitars now that have double necks on them. There's two different tunings on them, and he was very influential on that second tuning.
Interesting. So what is the first tuning? Like an open chord of some sort?
Honestly, that's the one instrument I don't play. So you really you got me on that one. That was a good one. But no, honestly, I don't really know. I haven't really paid it. That's an instrument that I'm absolutely terrified of.
Because you've seen someone play it in a certain way, you're like, oh, well, you want to mess with this?
Yeah, my dad was so good that that was another one of those things, like, I'll never be as good as him.
Yeah.
And he died about 23 years ago, and he left me he had an endorsement with Fender, but he had an endorsement with Showbud at one point, and then Gibson. Gibson built him this mahogany steel guitar. It probably weighs 1,000 pounds, and it's in my stepmother's basement. He left that to me, and I still have not gone over and picked it up because I'm just terrified. Having a bar is cool, but that's like having a whammy bar on all those different strings, and it's just, and I got all these pedals, and it was too much to think about.
Yeah.
But I made myself a promise that before it's over with, before I die, I at least have to learn how to play something on the steel guitar.
Yeah. I'd imagine it has to be something like a harmonica, where it's like one has your major operations, the other one has your minor operations, and you can kind of play between the two. But when that day comes, come back on the show, play me some pedal steel.
It'll probably be part of one song. It might be the chorus or something.
That's fine by me, man. It's one of those instruments that, like, you don't want to think that we're going to lose it.
Yeah.
But it's so odd the way that with MIDI ability, you're losing so much of the analog tonality of what it's like to play these instruments and make mistakes on them and whatnot.
You're losing the personality of the instrument big time. I mean,
Yeah.
as far as dynamics go and stuff like that, you lose a lot of that. You can never replace the human factor.
Yeah.
And on any instrument, really.
Well, and that kind of reminded me, like, a lot of our playing has to do with the constraints of the instrument. Like you laying the guitar out in this certain fashion. It's like, so you've taken the constraints of how these 6 strings relate to each other, and you've now expanded it to be something that's a little bit more familiar. When you sit down with a Mando, it's like you're only going to get these 4 note options, and you have to choose the best 4 notes. Why'd they make you choose violin when you went to performing arts?
Out of necessity, because nobody else wanted to. Nobody else, and they had to have an orchestra, and then nobody was signing up for violin, so I got stuck. That wound up coming in handy. Most recently, Daryl Worley called me. This is about a month and a half before Christmas. He called me up, and I thought, what does he want? And I said, hello, and he goes, hey, man, what are you doing? I said, I'm teaching. I'm getting ready to teach in a couple minutes. What's going on? He goes, all right. He goes, I'll make this quick. He goes, what would it take to get you to come back out here? And I went, probably a miracle. He said, I think I got one for you. He made me an offer, and I said, let me think about it. I called him back, and I told him no, because I thought, I don't want to go back out on the road. He made me a second offer. I said no again, and he called me a third time, and he said, if I want you, I'm going to get you. And I went, oh, boy, here we go. And he said, here's what's going on. He said, we have basically the house gig at Opryland Hotel, which is a huge deal
Incredible
in Nashville.
Operation, man.
To score that gig is huge. So basically for 30 days, our first show was on Thanksgiving Day, and the last show was actually on Christmas Day.
Wow.
We did 34 shows in 30 days, and I made bank.
And did they put you up at Opryland?
No, actually, I had a place to stay. My old bass player in Pam Tillis's band, I just called him out of nowhere, and I said, Daryl Worley, called me and asked me to come back to the band just temporarily, and I could stay on if I wanted. And he goes, you got any place to stay? And I said, no, I sold my house down there, which I did. And he said, I got the perfect place. He goes, I got a divorce. And he goes, I turned the studio in the basement into an apartment, and my studio's upstairs. He goes, I got an apartment for you, $800 a month. No utilities, no lease. There's Wi-Fi in the air. He goes, just leave it like you found it. I went, okay.
That's awesome.
So I had a great place to stay, and he was paying me really good.
And get to stay with a friend, too, which is just so much more homey.
Yeah, that was really cool. And then, but the deal was this time The reason that he called me to do this is that he needed somebody that was strong on the acoustic. And even though he's an acoustic player, it's a different deal when you're the artist and you're the one trying to deliver the song. To try to be a great acoustic player at the same time is a task. You know, try singing "Dust in the Wind" and picking that at the same time, and there's your example. And he said, I'm going to need you to play acoustic. He said, it's not the same gig you had before. And I said, well, what do you want me to do? And he said, well, let's talk about it. He goes, what I need is your voice. I went, okay. He goes, can you still hit those high notes? And I said, yeah, I can. He goes, give me one. And I let one rip, and he said, all right. And he said, I need your voice. He goes, but I really need you to play acoustic too. So I thought it was just going to be those two instruments. Well, it turned into me playing fiddle too, and mandolin, and playing a little bit of string patches and some bells and other stuff. And I wound up, you know.
I'm glad he paid you good.
I didn't play the harmonica. I thought I was going to have to do that because we got a song that has harmonica in it. But I wound up playing mandolin. Now, this is a funny story. I was playing on a demo for a Brad Paisley song one time, and the mandolin player, he didn't show up. Probably the last time he ever got a phone call. You know, you never do that.
Yeah.
But he didn't show up, and they said, Hayes, do you play mandolin? And I said, well, I don't know. He says, tuned just like a violin. You know, he said, but you just pick it. And they had one. They actually gave it to me, and it's called Old Hickory is the name of the mandolin. So I said, give me a few minutes. I went in one of their booths, and I put it up here and held it like a violin, and I kind of went, okay. And I had to wrap my head around the fingering, and I went, okay, I can do it. So I took it down here, and I can pick.
Yeah.
No problem. I put it together, and I played Devil Went Down to Georgia because I knew that on fiddle.
Yeah.
And I played it on the mandolin, and they were like, okay, cool, roll. Let's roll the tape.
I like that instead of learning the song that you had to play, you were like, let me blow their minds real quick, and then we'll get to this.
Well, I knew it. It was something that my finger, it fell under my fingers really easy, and I just thought, okay, I'll play that. So I walked in there, and they were like, they thought, nah, this is bull crap. This guy, he already knew how to play it. And I didn't. I had never touched one before.
That's hilarious. Add to the list, man.
Yeah.
Well, as someone that spent the long days and the late hours on the road and decided, like, all right, I'm at a point in my life where I don't want to do that much anymore. What are some of your reasons for stepping away from that side of life?
I had done it for so many years. I moved down there in like 99, I think. And right around like 2008, 2009, right around there, I had just done it so much that it became Groundhog Day, and people don't think that, they people will see in a video, he was really cool about putting the band in videos, so we got some good camera time too, so there's that perk, you get to eat great all the time. The money always gets better and better. The more number ones you get, the more money you make. And then he always spread it around. We all had 401k. He matched everything we put in there. He gave us free health insurance.
Wow.
No other artist does that. He's the only one.
People don't understand how unfathomable that is in the music community. And
Nobody does it.
I've always told my guys, if things really went well, that's a dream of mine, is that I could at least provide health care for a band that does the thing well. To hear there's guys doing it and that it is a gold standard to reach, it's like, that's special. Yeah,
he's no dummy. Daryl was a very successful guy. Before he ever really got into country music, he has a degree in biology and chemistry. He went to Alabama State. He's been a successful guy his whole life. He's just really a smart guy, but he's also basically just good old country boy. Matter of fact, when I met him, I had to show up. Pam Tillis is the one who introduced me to him. She had to appear on the Daryl Worley show, whatever. And for this new artist, I hadn't heard of him. He had a song on the radio at number 16 or something. I didn't know who he was. And so they didn't have a keyboard player then. And she said, well, I'm going to bring mine. And so she brought me. We show up. I've got my P200. It's not in a case. It barely fit in the back seat of my car. And I'm trying to get this thing out. And this guy, 6'6", comes over and grabs the other end. And he goes, yeah, I'll help you with that. And he grabbed the other end. We went in there, and it turned out it was him. And I said, man, you didn't have to do that. He goes, I ain't got that star thing in me, so forget it. and he was just super, super nice guy, and he wanted us to be more like a family. He didn't want to be one of those bands where you're constantly changing members. Now, we were always known as Daryl Worley and the Crew, with a backwards R and a K, Daryl Worley and the Crew. And he always made us part of like the meet and greets and stuff. And people got to know us too. So he'd come over to me when it would be time for me to step up and play a lead. He's like, "Get you some," like get up at the edge of the stage and let the spotlight get on you. He shared everything with us. He was he's still to this day, he's just such a great guy, and he wanted us to be comfortable. He didn't want band members changing and stuff. He wanted us to stay together until we died. That was it. And for a large part of that, we did. When I decided to leave, some other guys eventually fell off and stuff like that. Every artist has their peak, and then their career kind of goes the other way for a while. He and I both had children right around the same time. I had just had a baby. I didn't want to be out on the road forever, and he didn't either. And so he kind of called it quits for a while. He did, things here and there and stuff like that, but, he walked away from it too for a little while. And they came after him again. Big Machine Records came after him and said, "How would you like to do a comeback?" And he was like, he had actually the biggest song that he ever had was "Have You Forgotten?" We all got a gold record for that song. He rewrote the lyrics, 20 years later, basically, look back on 20 years. It's called "Have We Forgotten?" And he rewrote the words to the song, and Big Machine heard it and said, "We got something here." And that's when they came after him and they asked him to go, back out and start this again. And eventually, I got that phone call again.
Yeah.
And but he's just a super guy, man. I couldn't have asked for it. And I had been, offered gigs by people that were more successful, that had more longevity and stuff like that. And I always told them no, because I didn't want to go anywhere because it was so comfortable. We had we were like a family.
Yeah.
And that's important,
Well, and as someone that's trying to lead a band, it's like it's hard to quantify what is the next best thing to make sure you guys feel appreciated like that. Are there any particular piece of advice that you would give to guys in my position that are trying to create that same kind of ethos of, I want you to feel like you have an opportunity to play and be yourself on stage. When you walk off stage, that you're treated fairly, treated kindly, that you have a space to live and be comfortable. And then at the end of the day, that you're free to go if you got to go, but just know the door's open if you want to come back.
Yeah. One thing about Daryl, every time you look at him, the guy's smiling. And when somebody smiles at you, you want to do it back. It just puts you in a good mood. I'd say being upbeat, if when you're the band leader, and in your case, you're the hot dog, you're the guy up front, be a regular guy around your guys, and they'll see you as that. And that's how we always saw him. He was just one of us. We quit looking at him as a star pretty quick. He was just Daryl. He was the guy who'd stay. There'd be 400 fans wanting an autograph after a gig, and he'd stay until every autograph was signed. He was that kind of guy. And just him being that down home, just good old biscuits and gravy country guy, just, I'll do anything for you. You need some money? Here, I'll lend you some money, whatever. He was just great on every level. And he always talked to us, and he asked us stuff. He's like, how's your wife doing? How's your baby doing? Is your baby healthy and stuff? He wasn't creating the illusion that he cared. He truly did care. And I think being that kind of guy, that he was like a father figure to a lot of us, but he was a brother though too. Mm-hmm. And I think being that kind of guy, and he let us be ourselves. I mean, there was a point where, I won't say which magazine he posed for, but he grew his hair out. And this was when we started going rock, and he got rid of the fiddle and steel, and then he put me on electric guitar. Well, the other guys in the band started growing their hair out a little bit, and I said, I'm thinking, and I had short hair at the time because I'd been with Pam Tillis. She was all about the preppy look. But what he didn't know is that for years I had hair down to my waist. In the '80s, I was, that was my due.
Yeah.
And he said, "Go on, be yourself." So here I am. I grew my hair grew really fast. It doesn't do that anymore. But my hair grew really fast. It was about down to here. And I had jeans that I would, tie-dye, and I'd rip them up a little bit. I had the chain, hanging down and stuff like that. He said, just be yourself, and he liked it that I was different and that I had more of an edge. And back to something you asked me earlier about playing with a clean sound. Most of the time, the clean stuff was being played by Swa, the other guitar player. He was the chicken picking biscuits and gravy country guy.
Yeah.
And I was more of the rocky edge guy because I had more, you know, I just leaned in that direction because of my 80s stuff. I did have to tone it down some.
Yeah.
They were like, "Can you pull some of that distortion out of there?" Yeah. I heard that a lot.
What was your pedal chain like? Like, what was your guitar to amp signal path?
I used I think a Boss GT, either a 6 or an 8. It was gold, whatever one that was.
Nice.
It had all the different effects in it and stuff. I had to have something that was real simple.
Yeah.
Because I was still responsible for playing keys. I played harmonica. I played acoustic guitar. I wore a lot of hats.
Yeah.
And I had a microphone, you know, on my perch. I had a ramp that went up to my perch, and then I had another microphone out in front. So when I, you know, play a solo and then I had to sing immediately, I had a mic there. So I had to do a lot of different stuff. I needed something that had all of that stuff in one. And I got this thing for like $200 at Nashville Used Music. And I just took it home, and the guy that had it before me actually worked there. He plays guitar for Alan Parsons now.
Nice.
And he had programmed this thing where the sounds in it were just unbelievable. And I kind of walked through them and stuff, and I figured out what I could use and what I couldn't. I didn't have to mess with it. So I basically went right into this thing, right into the board. No amplifier, no nothing. It sound, and my sound man was pretty slick.
Yeah.
Because usually when you just go through something like that and no cabinet or anything like that, you're not going to get. But I mean, for what we were doing, it was perfect.
Yeah, man. What a great reason to buy like a Line 6 Helix or like the new Fender Frontman. Buy it used, see what someone else came up with, because the stock sounds are available to you on a reset, you know. But if you want to get some flavor, find the guy that works at the store that's been playing with this thing for 6 months and wants the next new thing, and walk away with that.
Yeah, I've done that many times.
Yeah.
I've done that with Line 6 stuff. Yeah, the Helix, that's going to be one of my next purchases.
It's worth it, man. I love it.
I'm a big fan of Pete Thorne. I know you know Pete. I'm a huge fan of his, and he did a demonstration of one time, and that was what he was using when he was overseas and stuff like that. And I was just blown away at the tones on this thing.
Yeah.
I said I got to have one, but you know.
And I just sat down with the Fender version of that yesterday. A buddy of mine bought one, and man, I think just the way that that's changed the game is such a positive thing, because there's so many sounds in there that I'm not gonna buy the one pedal that has a pitch shift on it. Like, that doesn't sound like fun. Boy, do I like having a pitch shift now. Like, it's just hilarious. So many things that you pass on.
You ever had the whammy pedal?
But that's like, I've never had something like that with the pitch whammy, and like I have so much fun going from 2 octaves down and ramping that thing into oblivion. Yeah,
you can. You got to pick your spots on something like that because you can't use it on every song. It's like, you know, not to pick on Zakk Wylde, but every solo that he does, it's the wah pedal.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. You know how he came up with his sound? Is that Zakk was always known for drinking Budweiser. Every picture you'd see, he had a bottle of Bud or a can of Bud. Well, he had a bottle of Bud, and the cap came off, and it fell on the floor, and it wound up underneath his Crybaby Wah, where when you step down on the pedal, it wouldn't go down all the way because there was that bottle cap in there. And he thought, man, that sounds really cool there, and that frequency was cool. And that's how when they made the Zakk pedal, they made it, and they figured out what the distance was on that thing.
That's hilarious.
Yeah.
Well, man, you never know when your drinking problem is going to come in handy.
Yeah, he quit. He hasn't drank for years. They said you got a blood clot floating around in your body, and if you drink, you're going to die. And he was able to walk away from it like that.
Good for him.
My
man.
hat's off to him.
I don't think there's anyone that has more epic rock and roll stories than him from his Ozzy days, where it's like they had the competition of who could go longer without showering, and I think they both went like 6 months.
Oh yeah. Yeah, there were things moving around in his beard. You know, at times you look at him and say, "Is that a mouse?" Or is that
Did you spend time around Zakk?
I've met him a couple times.
Yeah,
and super nice guy, and interesting little story. Zakk got the job and I didn't. Okay, so when that all happened back in the day, I'll make this short.
No,
I could go on forever
you
about
got
time. MTV had a contest. I guess Sharon Osbourne got mad and fired the guitar player, and MTV made a big deal about it. They said, "How would you like to be Ozzy's next guitar player?" And so they said, you know, my sister wrote down all the information and stuff, and they ran that ad a whole bunch on there and stuff. You basically had to go to a studio. They wanted a decent recording of you playing, some of the like Flying High Again. They wanted to hear you play the solo Over the Mountain,
Yeah.
Crazy Train, all that stuff. And I also put an original on mine too, and it had a lead on it too. Well, about like 30 days had gone by, and we hadn't heard anything, and I was like, well, I guess nothing's going to happen. Well, MTV came on, and they said, well, due to the overwhelming response that we got over 10,000 tapes, but we're going to listen to every one of them. I made the top 100, and so did Zach. Now, Zach is the only guy out of all those people that didn't mail in a photo. So Ozzy had no idea what he even looked like. And if you look at Zach before he grew that, carpet out that he's famous for, the Viking look, he looked a lot like Randy Rhoads. And Ozzy saw him, and I never wound up getting to do the in-person audition because Zach beat me to the punch.
Man, what was the name of the original you put on there?
Gosh, I don't remember. I can't remember what it was called. It was something stupid because I was really bad at naming, so I couldn't write lyrics back then either.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of rock lyrics. That's what you get for being into the kind of music I was into for all that time. I mean, if you listen to a Van Halen album, you might as well be listening like the early Van Halen. You might as well be reading the back of a cereal box or something because it sounds cool because of the tone of David Lee Roth's voice and the little train whistle scream he does and all that stuff. But some of those songs, I mean, the words just don't make any sense.
Yeah. As a guy that spent some time around country music, it's like the storytelling is everything.
It is
everything. And then you look at Jump, and you're like, go ahead and jump.
Yeah.
Well, you gotta jump.
I think he was watching. I heard this could be some BS or whatever. I heard a story about that from Dave, saying that he was watching a show, and this guy was on the ledge, And Dave said, he goes, I'd be the guy out there going, go ahead, jump, and that's and thought of the title or whatever. And that was supposedly where that came from. I don't know if that's true or not, but it sure is a good story.
Yeah, that reminds me of when Jim Carrey plays Jumper in, what is it, Yes Man or something like that. You ever seen that movie?
No, I've not seen it.
No, he goes to this conference. It's like a self-help conference. And they're like, you need to say yes to life's opportunities. So it's just this tale of this guy saying yes to literally everything. Do you want to take guitar lessons? Yes. Do you want to be a volunteer fireman? Yes. So he ends up on the ledge with this guy, and he sees that, like, this guy's just got nothing to live for. And he's looking around, and he's like, how am I going to do this? Sees a guitar in the corner of the room. He comes back, wish you would step back from that ledge, my friend. It's an awesome scene.
Oh, that sounds funny. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah. Brother, as we conclude today, can you plug where you're teaching at and all the things you're doing in Cincinnati now?
Yeah. Currently, I'm teaching in Madera on the corner of Camargo and Miami, real big intersection there, at a place my sister owns it. It's a music school called Musique Madera, and it's QUE. It's not ended with a C, so it's Musique Madera. And I teach there anywhere from 3 to 8. I'm there most days of the week. I'm still filling in the schedule, so I still got some holes if anybody's interested.
Cool. Instruments that are included?
Right now, I'm teaching mostly guitar, piano, and I got 2 vocal students. Those are the first 2 students that signed up, and I thought, that's really weird. Okay. I do an interesting thing with vocal lessons. I record them on the software that I have on Cubase, and I go back and we listen to it and critique it, and then I'll tune it. If they're out of tune, I'll tune it, and I'll give them a version of them singing perfectly in tune. They go home, they learn how to sing like themselves, singing perfectly in tune. That all happened by accident one day. I did that, and it just worked, and I've been doing it ever since.
What a weird reference to have. Like, you don't want to sound like the auto-tune version of yourself, but that recognition of that's my voice, I'm capable of this thing, like it's a self-affirming thing.
It's a really good trick. The other thing I was going to do is plug my jam channel. I've got a YouTube channel called Primo Jam Tracks. And basically, this is a lot of mostly keyboard, bass, and percussion, drums, stuff like that. But what I left out in most of these tracks is the guitar, and that puts you in the driver's seat, basically, to be the guitar player. And these are fun. They're fun to play over, and I've gotten, I don't know, something like 30,000 hits on this channel, and it hasn't really been out that long. But people are digging what I'm doing, and it's different than what everybody else is doing.
Yeah.
And so that's fun. If you look on the Musique Madera Facebook page. There's some. I just did a guitar seminar there this past Saturday. Good thing I didn't chop my finger off before that. And I did a like an open house like guitar seminar. It was just all me, and I was playing along with my tracks and then taking questions and stuff like that. But there's a couple clips on there of me playing. If you want to get a load of some of my electric guitar stuff, and just don't pay any attention to the two-handed stuff. People have labeled me as a Van Halen clone for a long time, and I try not to do that, but I just can't help it. Every now and then I got to sneak that finger over there.
It's part of your skill set, man.
Yeah. I try not to lean on it too much. I try to play more melodic these days, but that's a good channel to learn how to play over. And it's each one of those tracks are about 8 minutes long a piece, so you can really stretch out. There's no vocals, so you can sit there and mess up, write the book of mistakes, and by the time you're done, hey, I got something here.
Beautiful. Well, I think it's a real stroke of good fortune to have you back in Cincinnati, brother. I'm sure a generation of students are going to grow to do big things, and you have wonderful stories. So thank you for coming on today, and come back sometime.
Thanks for having me.
All right, y'all. This is the Weekly Whiv. We'll catch you soon.